Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classics You Slept Through. I'm Kyle Davis, along with a girl whose knees bend the correct direction, my sister, Meredith Davis. Hey Meredith, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great. I'm great.
Excellent. You're hanging in there, another week of quarantining going by?
Yeah.
The Northeast has not yet opened up.
No, not even close.
Here in the South, we're opening. We're back in business, baby. It's all gone. The COVID-19 era is over, as places are declaring. So, hooray for that. We win, I guess.
It's amazing
Excellent.
we can just stop it like that.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Definitely. Well, this week, we've got something wonderfully uplifting and positive to take your mind off of all of that. We've got The Island of Dr. Moreau. And I got to tell you, I am super stoked about this one.
Yeah.
This is book number 3 that we're doing on the pod. This one is definitely right in my wheelhouse. I love this. This is my jam right here. So The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. I've never read this before. Have you?
No, I haven't. Yeah.
Have you read any Wells before?
No, the only H.G. Wells that I've ever come into contact with was that old cassette Dad had in the 83 Nissan. That was of a recording of the War of the Worlds, and I used to listen to it on drives. But
which was the
radio broadcast.
Orson Welles. Thank you. As my mind is going
never mind.
blank.
Then no.
Well, it's the story. It's H.G. Wells' story, but Orson Welles and the Mercury Radio Company, they produced it as a radio program. And so that's what that recording was. That was the original radio broadcast.
Well, they shouldn't have the same last name.
They don't. H.G. Wells does not have an extra E. Orson Welles has 2 E's in his name. So they are different.
All right, fine. So that's the only H.G. Wells that I've ever come into contact with is that. And I would not have originally said this was in my wheelhouse, which is stupid because I love good books are simply good books. So me saying now or back in the day, like, I don't read a lot of fantasy or I don't read a lot of sci-fi. If it's good, it's good. So this is good.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully we're expanding genres and exposing you listeners to new things you haven't read before.
Yeah.
So I haven't read this specific book before, but I've wanted to for years. I have read other H.G. Wells books. I've read The Time Machine. I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I've read The Invisible Man, which, as I had to point out to my wife, is a different book from Invisible Man.
Which is just as good. Well, I don't know if just as good, but it's really good.
Not science fiction. It's more depressing, real fiction. Or I guess realness, not fiction. But definitely a different book than The Invisible Man. But I have not read this one before. And so I was very excited when we chose this. I guess I chose it for that reason. And to get into it. And immediately... And I had the same reaction with other classic books that I've encountered. Notably, I remember when I finally read War and Peace a few years ago, how it hooked me immediately. And you're like, now I see why this is a classic book, and this is good, because this is quite good. So from the start, this one pulled me in.
Yeah. It reminded me of my experience with Frankenstein in that way. The first time I read Frankenstein, I've read it a few times now, I thought, this is an old book, and I know it's a classic, but, how good can it be? Time period, language, all of that. And it was so good. It is so good. And it has a similar setup where they explain what, the backstory, and then they get into the actual story, which is what happens in this book. Right.
So why don't we get into this book? So this starts out with a short introduction from our protagonist's nephew. So I like this book, and I think this is sort of a conceit that was popular. I think Bram Stoker's Dracula was written about the same time, early turn of the century, where it's a narrative written in the past. So the structure of the book is published papers that the nephew finds among the uncle's possessions after his passing. And so the nephew places a little intro in the beginning explaining how he found the papers and where the uncle, what had happened to him. So this is a little interesting. So I went ahead and the intro mentions a few locations, a few latitude and longitude coordinates, and some names. And I went ahead and checked these out because there are discrepancies. So the introduction mentions Africa, which I believe, and I've confirmed this on a few other audio recordings of the book and other looking it up on the web. The book says Africa, but if you look at the time periods and the locations, it later mentions Arica, which is a colony in Chile. So I believe the original, this is my theory, the introduction's mention of Africa, I think, is a misprint, although I have also read that most of the animals that we will encounter are African animals. So I don't know. But either way, the timeline of the book, you're not going to set out from Africa in January of 1887 and then also sink off the western coast of Ecuador in the same month. That's just a physical impossibility to get that far. So
winds were strong.
Very strong winds. Even though you're going against the prevailing wind current as you're going east to west. So we find that the Lady Vane, which Edward Prendick, our protagonist, was a passenger, it collides with a derelict vessel in the northern Pacific Ocean off the western coast of Ecuador in January. He then gets picked up. I guess he drifted southeast, more towards Peru, and gets picked up there. And then the third coordinate that gets mentioned is obviously a misprint because we go from, 1 degree south, 5 degrees south, 107 degree west, 101 degree west, to 105 degrees east, which puts you northwest of Jakarta on land in Indonesia. So I think that coordinate is also a misprint in all the editions that I've found. So I think it's safe to
This is where a lack of geography skills comes in handy because
so.
I just accepted everything. I was like, oh, what a journey. This makes total sense. All right.
Exactly.
Next chapter.
And it is quite a journey. So with all that said, the area we're looking at here is to the east of Ecuador and Peru, or to the west of Ecuador and Peru, basically, in the middle of the ocean. Not too far, I don't know if this is coincidental or not, but in the general vicinity of the Galapagos Islands. So I don't know if that was sort of the vibe he was going with here as well.
Interesting, because we learn later Moreau has some thoughts on evolution and what he's trying to do and all of that. But we'll learn that in a little bit.
Right. So let's get into the book proper. So our first chapter is a short chapter. A lot of these are short chapters, but this first chapter just sort of explains what happens to Edward Prendick after his ship, the Lady Vane, is sunk. He finds himself in a dinghy with two other guys. They're out at sea for a few days, 8 days or so, I think. They have no food, no water, and so they basically turn to cannibalism and draw straws to determine who they're going to eat. And this is just 8 days they were out. So pretty freaky stuff. Have you read Unbroken?
No.
Very good book. It's written by the same author who wrote Seabiscuit. But it's the story of a World War II bomber crew that gets shot down and adrift in the Pacific. And 3 of the guys are on a rubber raft. I want to say for 50-some days. It's some insane amount of time that they're out there. And they don't resort to eating themselves, fortunately. But they do have to catch fish and snare birds and drink their blood and all kinds of things to survive. But just reading the book, it's a fantastic, phenomenal book. But just the ordeals they go through just on the Pacific Ocean, in the heat and the sun and the exposure and the salt water on their skin, and I mean, it's just horrific to read it. So I was kind of having flashbacks to that while I was just reading this first chapter. I can't swim, so being stranded on the ocean is probably about the most terrifying thing that I could possibly think of.
You can swim.
I can barely swim. I definitely would.
The Army said you have to swim, right?
Well, I can swim nominally I can swim. But if you found me in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I think, after 8 days, I'd be going the Edric Prendick route of, I'm just going to drown myself. Vice, the Unbroken, the guys are surviving. So shout out to Unbroken.
Just let the sharks come.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Shout out to Unbroken. Really good book. Because then
these guys don't even think of anything else. They're like, we just have to eat each other.
Right, 8 days in, we're just going to have to eat each other. Let's
fish, birds, whatever.
Birds. Nope, let's just eat each other. Well, he gets picked up in chapter 2 and nursed back to health, and some creepy foreshadowing, I think. So we don't know his name yet. It ends up being our friend Montgomery, but he gives Prendick some injections and gives him something to drink that tastes like blood. So knowing what we learn later of our friend Montgomery, this is a pretty creepy little
He just
segue.
gave him blood. He just
probably did.
Gave him blood, and it made him feel stronger. Gave him some of that good mutant blood or something.
And we've already mentioned Dracula once, so definitely.
Yeah.
So again, another short chapter as we're setting the stage here to get to the titular island of Dr. Moreau.
And Pendrick, too, feels very grateful, despite the fact that he probably just drank blood. He feels really grateful to Montgomery and feels this, I think, immediate bond as, Montgomery saved his life. And Montgomery's like, no.
I was bored.
Just chance, luck. Don't be like that.
Exactly. If I had something better to do that day, I probably would have just let you die.
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly what he said, pretty much.
It does. I mean, Montgomery's kind of playing it cool at this point, but at least in the first half here, I think he's a little more sympathetic to Prendick's situation than he's trying to let on.
Well, I think he feels like some connection to how whatever life Pendrick has now clearly is going to lose because he's on this ship. He's not getting back to London, and they talk about London and reminisce and things like that. And I think that cause of Pendrick planted this nostalgic seed in Montgomery's brain where he's like, oh, man, if I just hadn't been who I was so many years ago and not made the mistake that I made, I could be back in London. And I think he feels a little bit of pity. I think you're right.
Exactly. All right, so that brings us to chapter 3, where we first meet Montgomery's assistant, the black-faced man, who is hunched. His head is in his, down into his shoulders. He's sort of odd. His eyes have a strange cast to him. And how Prendick encounters him is he sees the reaction of the captain and crew of the Ipecacuanha to this attendant. They do not like him. They don't want him coming fore in the ship. They want him to remain aft in the back of the ship, not be seen. He's definitely an unsettling guy, and Prendick feels this as well when he sees him.
And along with the other things that they don't want on the ship, they've got all these animals. Montgomery has all these animals, a puma included, some rabbits, and they're making a mess of the captain's deck. And so the captain really doesn't like any of this. Pendrick asks, is this an ocean menagerie?
Right.
And what are these beasts for? Montgomery doesn't really give any clear answers.
And right, you see sort of the undiscipline of the ship at this point, of how messy and dirty it is, which if you're especially in those days out at sea, if you didn't enforce discipline on a ship, you were dead. The slightest slip in discipline, I mean, a captain has really no control other than enforcing discipline among his men, because if they don't all, one, the ship could go down if they're not all pulling together, but then two, if he loses grip on the crew, there's mutiny and whatnot. So the fact that, he's obviously not a disciplined guy himself, our captain, who's drunk upon every encounter that we find him.
Captain Davis, I believe.
Davies. He's, cousins, Our grandparents were a Davis who married a Davies, or I guess vice versa. A Davies married a Davis. So anyway.
Yeah, I learned, though, that all the Davies, so Nana's family, changed their names to Davis, and she's the only one who refused.
That sort of fits, I suppose.
That's what our aunt told us. It does fit her personality. She refused to change her name to Davis, and then she met Grandpa, and lo and behold, she's a Davis anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of Davies immigrants were forced to change their name to Davis. I guess it's more American sounding. Sure. Whatever.
I don't know.
Break with the old country. Okay, so that's chapter 3. Again, these are quite short in the beginning. Chapter 4, it's evening. Prendick and Montgomery are kind of hanging out on deck of the ship talking. And this is where you had mentioned earlier, we're sort of alluding to Montgomery's past. He eagerly begins asking Prendick about London. They have some commonality because they both studied biology, where, Montgomery was a medical student, was young, and apparently got into some trouble, which led to his current situation.
We don't know what kind of trouble, though.
Right.
He tells just enough to pique Pendrick's curiosity, but Pendrick, being the good, I guess, Englishman that he is, doesn't pry too much, though he says, if you want to tell me your tale, I'm here to listen. And Montgomery's like, no, I don't want to tell you.
Even though he seemed like he was ready to unburden himself.
Yeah.
So we do know that, but for 10 minutes of an indiscretion and a foggy night, Montgomery would not be where he is, and if he didn't like to drink so much. So
isn't that just true for all of us? No.
Which is interesting, as we will see later on. Prendick does not drink at all. He is an abstainer, as he calls himself.
Has been his whole life.
Since birth.
Since birth.
Since birth. He's refused drink. So...
maybe it was an option back then.
Right, I guess so. Chapter 5, we arrive at the island, and on a personal level, this chapter kind of freaked me out a little bit, because if you put yourself in Prendick's shoes, he was adrift in the Pacific Ocean for days, almost ate his fellow survivor from after just a week.
Which we forgot to mention, in the act of going through with eating, the guy being eaten was like, no, and they got into a tussle, they fell overboard.
This is true.
Everybody but Pendrick drowns.
So Prendick decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to resort to cannibalism, and then he lost his source of food anyway. So great job, Prendick. Didn't get that good man meat. Now we arrive at the island, and the captain of the ship wants to turn Prendick out. I suppose at this point, Prendick's been on the ship, I think he said 4 days since he was picked up or so. At no point did he ever have a conversation with the captain about, hey, so can you take me? Where are you headed? Can you take me, drop me off somewhere? He just made the bold assumption the captain was going to let him hang out on the ship. And the captain's not having it. He has grouped Pendrick with Montgomery and the animals and Montgomery's attendant. And he's like, nope, you're off my ship. Go.
He tells Pendrick, your name is Shut Up. Mr. Shut Up. Just stop talking. Get off my ship. Overboard with you. He's like, but my name's Pendrick. Pendrick be damned. Shut up. That's your name.
Well, I think part of it, I mean, this is me. I think the captain's like, I don't even want to know your name, dude. I am whatever's going to happen on that island. I want no part of it. I don't even want to know your name. Complete plausible deniability here.
Overboard, Mr. Shut Up.
Exactly. Unfortunately, Moreau is like, nah, we can't have you either, buddy. We're doing stuff here. Don't need you. Tries
to appeal to Montgomery, and Montgomery is on Moreau's side for the most part in the beginning.
Right. And Pendrick just completely, he throws a temper tantrum. I mean,
well, he does. He starts to bawl and cry and sob, but he's being, can't ride this ship, back on your dinghy with you, Mr. Shut Up.
In the middle of the Pacific, which I guess fortunately they brought the dinghy with them. He, I guess, didn't realize that it's been towed behind the boat this entire time. So they toss him into this half-swamped dinghy and
no oars.
Say, get out of here. Go.
Yeah.
Which I guess is sort of murder, because basically the captain's consigning him to death in the Pacific.
Yeah. He flung himself full length on the deck. He really did.
He did.
He just has a temper tantrum. He's like, I'm not leaving. But what else? What other recourse does he have?
I really felt for Pendrick in this chapter. I was a little terrified myself reading this.
Yeah. That would be absolutely terrifying, because he probably has, he just got out of that situation and probably felt such relief. And now all the trauma of that previous situation is coming back because it's about to happen to him again.
And as we'll see, he's, 8 days on the boat. He's not recovered. He's still weak and, very affected by this.
His skin's probably like peeling off from being sunburned.
Exactly.
Can imagine what happens to you.
Exactly. Again, shout out to Unbroken. Read that book and you'll see what these guys went through.
Did they make a movie?
They did, I believe. I've not seen the movie, but I have read the book.
It does remind me, though, of the part in Jaws where the grizzly guy is talking about how he was part of that naval ship that got sunk and they stayed in the water with the sharks, and about how, was it the Indiana? No. What ship is that?
I don't know.
Doesn't matter. How do you not know what I'm talking about, Mr.?
Unfortunately, I've not seen Jaws either. I know, right? Yes, I know. Bad on me. Yeah, I haven't seen Jaws. Well, because I was a kid and it kind of freaked me out. It was scary.
Well, yeah, me too, but I've only seen it in the last probably within the last 5 years, but I've also seen it like 4 times. It's as good as everybody says that it is. Oh, it's so good.
Much like the theme of this podcast, classic movies are classic for a reason.
Yeah.
That's how I felt when I finally saw Casablanca, which I absolutely loved.
Oh my God, that's so good.
Such a good movie.
That's Ben's favorite movie.
Oh, is it? It's probably my number 3 or 4. It's up there. It's not my favorite, but it's up there.
I once said to someone in a conversation about Casablanca how funny it is, and they were like, "What? It's about Nazis." And I was like, "But it's
it actually is pretty funny.
The humor is great in that movie. Old movie humor is just the one-liners; they just hit you.
Yeah,
it's really good. Anyway, we digress. Watch Jaws. Watch Casablanca.
Good movie. See, you come for classic books, and you get movie recommendations as well.
Yeah.
All right, so we move into chapter 6, and Montgomery, the bad guy at the Heart of Gold, right? He takes pity on Prendick. I keep putting an extra R in there. He takes pity on Prendick, and they pick him up and bring him onto the island. Moreau reinforces to him that you are here uninvited, but you can stay, I guess. They settle him in, and Montgomery warns him about the island.
Mm-hmm.
He tells him, don't go wandering off. This is an infernally rum place. And at the end of the chapter, he begins to warn him about Moreau, but again, stops himself short. And then they release the rabbits.
Release the rabbit!
Go forth and multiply rabbits, because we haven't had meat on the island, and we're hungry.
It sounds ominously cute.
It does. It does. So chapter 7, we get to his new digs. So Montgomery, and I found this interesting, Montgomery has a room. So they arrive at the inhabitation of the island, which is a square stone paddock or enclosure with gates, large gates. I'm obviously picturing, like Jurassic Park.
That's exactly what I'm picturing. Anytime I hear the word paddock,
right.
I think of Jurassic Park.
And so apparently Montgomery has an apartment which has an exterior door. So this stone paddock, this stone enclosure, is squared off, but it has a door leading on the one side into this apartment, and then another door leading out. And Montgomery says, and so it's sort of almost a communal space as well, because Montgomery says that they take their meals there. And apparently there is a second hut. I think when Prendick arrives, he notices 2 huts. So this is the one. My assumption is that Montgomery then goes to bunk with Moreau, because he doesn't stay with Prendick.
Yeah.
Even though they use Montgomery's room as sort of a communal eating space.
And that's the only option. He said, there's my room with the outer door, and he's like, that's it?
Yep.
That's where he's got to go?
That's where we'll put him.
That's the only option.
Your room, Montgomery. Yeah. I don't know if Moreau put 2 and 2 together that now he's going to have a roommate, but hey, whatever. They've been living on this island for like a decade together, so maybe it's not a big deal for them.
Yeah.
The inner door, they then lock and, tell him, you're not going through this door. They bring some food to Moreau, and the attendant comes in. Montgomery's guy comes in, and as he's putting the tray down, Moreau gets a good look at his ears.
You mean Prendick gets a good look at his ears, which are pointed, furry, and brown?
Yes, covered in brown fur. So he's kind of creeped out by this. Naturally, he's like, what is going on?
I don't see why.
Yeah, exactly, right. So that rolls us right into chapter 8, where Montgomery comes in to eat with Moreau, and he says, or not with Moreau, with Prendick. Tells him, hey, Moreau's busy, he's not going to join us. He wants to get to work right away. This guy, I mean, they get back to the island, they brought these animals, and Moreau's like, yo, I got to get to work now. I want to start cutting these animals up.
Well, I think there's two things before we move on. Well, before we get too much into that chapter, two things that also happened in the previous one where they're setting up the room and he says, I mean, for all their secrecy, they're pretty overt about the fact that they have a secret. So they're like,
this is true. We
have a secret here. Nothing very dreadful, really, to a sane man.
But you're new, and we're not going to take you into our confidence yet.
Right. Remember, you're uninvited.
Right.
So welcome.
Which I guess we should mention. Maybe this may be the point where Prendick kind of reveals to Moreau that he has training in biology, and Moreau suddenly his affect changes a little, and he regards Prendick a little more cordially.
Right.
So perhaps they're thinking, oh, maybe this guy could be an asset down the road,
colleague of sorts.
Right.
And then Montgomery says, we usually eat our meals in here, but you'll be fine to stay in here. And then he leaves, but as he's leaving, Pendrick hears him say, Moreau. And he's like, wait a second.
Oh, right. Here's the name.
His name, Moreau. Why does that sound so familiar here in the middle of nowhere? These people I don't recognize. Where have I heard the name Moreau before?
Right.
And he can't get it out of his head.
He finally does figure out, and I will admit, I had a lot of trouble with this during the read aloud. I could not say Moreau, I can't say it now, Moreau horrors.
The Moreau.
Try to say Moreau horrors. Try to say that 5 times fast, right? Moreau
the
horrors.
Moreau horrors.
Yeah. Anyway, I had difficulty with that on the reading. So that gets us to chapter 8. So we're in chapter 8, and Montgomery comes in to have a meal, and Prendick starts to kind of press him on the ears of his attendant. He's like, hey, your buddy, where'd you find him? He's got, like, pointy ears. And Montgomery's like, oh, really? Pointy ears? Yeah, never. What were they like? Never saw that before. And he doesn't do a real good job because Prendick says, I can tell he's trying to cover something up here. And he kind of just gives him a little, I picked him up in San Francisco. Sure.
those San Franciscans are pointy ears and scarves.
I guess if you were to go, even in 1898 or whatever this was, I guess San Francisco was still seen as a city of weirdos even back then, huh? That's your go-to. Like, yeah, San Francisco, found him there.
Yeah, and Pendrick's trying to put this all together. Moreau, the horrors. He knows that Moreau was a vivisector.
Right. And shout out San Francisco. I've lived in California. San Francisco is a lovely city. I quite enjoy it. Anyway.
Of course.
Yes.
I know plenty of San Franciscans.
There you go. Do they have pointy ears covered in brown fur?
I never noticed.
Are they really from San Francisco if they don't?
So a vivisector is someone, we should define that term, because I looked it up to make sure that I knew what it was. A vivisector is someone who does experiments on live animals. As it can be described as a live dissection. So the actual word is a vivisection. Yeah. Or a particularly harsh critique of someone's essay.
Oh, very nice.
That's a second definition, which is not what Moreau is doing. He's not in his room grading essays and just ripping them apart.
Very true. So the definitions that I looked up, the dictionary does say, I guess in modern times, it doesn't seem that it felt this way in the book, but that it does carry a negative connotation. So
it didn't feel that way to you in the book?
No, it didn't. So I think maybe medical and research practices of the turn of the century were less, even though the pamphlet which is referenced about the Moreau horrors and the dog that escapes into London, that's flayed and whatnot. So animal cruelty obviously was an issue back then, but it doesn't seem to be quite to the level it is nowadays, where animal experimentation itself is sort of looked down upon, as necessary as it is for medical research.
So maybe vivisection, once was a type of science that was...
Like phrenology was once a respected medical science, and now you're like, no, okay.
Bloodletting and things like that.
Exactly, right. So maybe nowadays vivisection carries a more negative connotation, that you're not going to slice open a live animal. I'm not a doctor. I've never been to medical school. I don't know. Maybe they still do. Who knows? Ugh. So any doctors in the audience, you can chime in on vivisection. Do we still do it? Is there a medical necessity for it? So anyway, chapter 8 ends with some vivisection. The puma starts getting vivisected. And apparently this takes quite a while, as we'll see.
It feels like days.
It feels like a few days this puma is getting ripped apart by old Moreau.
And he's just screaming and crying.
And Prendick cannot take it, so he decides, I got to get out of here. And he starts, I don't know where he thinks he's going to go. Prendick's motivations here, just putting myself in his shoes, is very, very interesting. I know Moreau has mentioned that, they only see a boat, like once a year if they're lucky. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, it's got to be a little more frequently, because Montgomery left the island to get animals to come back, so, Montgomery has some method to get off the island and to return. Maybe he's got to deal with Captain Davies to check on them every few months. I don't know. But
that's a good point.
But I don't know what Prendick is thinking he's going to do at this point. So he's hasn't even been on the island a day yet. I mean, he just got picked up from being adrift for 8 days. He got unceremoniously booted off another boat. He's in the middle of the South Pacific. No way to contact anyone or to get himself off the island. And Moreau and Montgomery are the only people that are even marginally caring about his welfare at this point. And he's like, oh, hey, they're cutting up a puma. I got to get out of here.
I think at this point he's really just trying to escape the sounds of the puma. The last paragraph of the chapter, he leaves, the crying's even louder outdoors, and he says, it was as if all the pain in the world had found a voice. Yet had I known such pain was in the next room, and had it been dumb, I believe, I have thought since, I could have stood it well enough. It is when suffering finds a voice and sets our nerves quivering that this pity comes troubling us. Funny how he slips from the I to an us. Suddenly there. But in spite of the brilliant sunlight and the green fans of the trees waving, soothing sea breeze, the world was confusion. And I was out of earshot, finally. So, had he known the puma was being vivisected and in excruciating pain, but they'd maybe cut the vocal cords, he could have stood it. It's fine. Well, I can hear you suffering.
Right. I think we can equate that to just us in modern day. I mean, think about us sitting here in America. We know, conceptually, there are atrocities and horrors occurring across the world. Probably in your own town. I mean, you think of any crime or any kind of oppression the world over, you conceptually know it's happening, but you're not actively concerned about it. But should you watch a documentary or hear a story of an escaped refugee or, something along those lines, something that gives it a personalized voice, suddenly you care about that thing much more than even though it was going on the week before and you were still just going to Target, or I guess not going to Target, maybe ordering from Target.com.
Thinking about what it used to be like to go to Target.
Exactly.
No, well, but I think even worse, though, Pendrick's point is, even if it's in the next room and he knows it's happening, if he can shut the door and not hear it, it's fine. So it's not even conceptual. It's literally in the next room. It'd be like if I knew my neighbor, something terrible was happening to my neighbor currently, right now, but I can't hear it and it's not affecting me. Do I still call somebody?
Right.
But I know, currently right now, this person is being vivisected. I don't know. Do I call someone simply because I can't hear what's happening? And he can't get in to the room. So I guess perhaps part of it is still conceptual for him. He's not quite sure. He just knows that the puma's crying.
Right. And again, maybe the realities of his situation, he doesn't want to rock the boat too much, as it were. Because really, where's he going to go? What's he going to do? If he really gets on Moreau's bad side, he's cut off from anything. He has no way of even eating. I mean, he's reliant on Moreau to feed him at this point. So.
Yeah. Well, I think H.G. Wells is being pretty clear here suddenly, again with that switch. Like it's I the whole way. And then it is when suffering finds a voice, it sets our nerves quivering and pity comes troubling us. The troubling of pity. It's like, I don't know. It's suddenly not Pendrick anymore.
Do you think there's a larger theme that Wells is trying to bring out in the book?
I think so.
Interesting. All right. Well, that finishes up 8. This brings us to chapter 9, where he can't stand the sounds of the puma anymore, so he goes out and begins walking the island. Get a lot of natural descriptions in this, part of the book, the different plants he's seeing and the water and the things he's going over. And then he encounters something. He sees a shape. He identifies it as a man.
Mm-hmm.
Sees them on all fours drinking water from a stream.
Yeah, it was a few of them, not just one, right?
No, I think first he just sees one.
And then he sees them. At least one of them was talking to 2 others.
Right.
Anyway, he sees them.
Yep, you're right. Yep. And he sees that so at first he thinks they're just like the island natives. Like perhaps this island is not uninhabited. Or inhabited, I guess would be the term. But here we get into a little problematic racial description. He assumes that if they are island natives, that they are, quote, savages, and they would not be wearing clothing. So, which I think is not anthropologically accurate. I think most civilizations and most people have made clothes throughout the year.
Yeah, some sort of covering, even if it's not
something.
Even if it's not what we in Western society call quote unquote clothes.
Right. So, okay.
But that's stuff.
Okay, thank you, turn of the century racial attitudes towards native populations. Little problematic there.
Yeah, we're going to run in that a lot when we read classic books.
Yes, we shall. And then just calling them savages to begin with. I think most even most native populations have a civilization of some sort. They aren't brutally savage. Right. But irregardless of all that, the guy's wearing clothing. Like he's wearing actual sort of manufactured clothing. So that strikes him as strange, and so he wants to investigate. So Pendrick kind of follows him for a bit, sees him kind of talking to the other 2 guys, doesn't understand what they're saying, but then
some of them look a little swinish.
Yeah.
Their torsos are much longer than their legs, and their legs are bent and at odd angles.
Right. But he ends up getting caught. They see him, and so he asks them, "Who are you?" And they just shout, "No," and start running. So he turns to get away and realizes he's being followed. So one of them has decided to kind of trail him. And this goes on for a little bit. He goes through the forest with this creature kind of paralleling his motions, hidden off in the undergrowth, so he can't really get a clear look at him. He gets down to the beach, picks up a rock, kind of gets it into his handkerchief as a sling. Creature comes out. I was impressed by this. Pendrick, man, he fires off a rock and nails him in the forehead. I don't know that I could take a handkerchief and a rock and make it propel with any sort of velocity or accuracy. So good on Pendrick for doing that, defending himself.
I think he's probably just as surprised as we are.
Right. Well, he apparently murders the thing because it lands face down in the stream, and he's too scared to even check it out. So he's been encountering these things. He's not sure what they are. He's curious. now he kills one, and he's like, I'm not even going to look at it. He just decides not going to investigate. And at that moment, he is also saved from his decision because Montgomery shows up.
Yeah, he hears a voice calling him, and he realizes, we realize that it's Montgomery. But in this pursuit or this altercation, he sees, I think, at least one, if not more of them, on all fours. And when they see them, they stand up.
Right. Which is a little foreshadowing that we're going to get to in another few chapters when he kind of encounters more of them.
Yeah, but how creepy is that, though?
Right.
Some of the scariest things in horror movies that I used to watch is when somebody walks in a very abnormal way, like those Korean and Japanese horror films where they do a backbend and walk really fast.
Yes.
Or their legs bend the wrong way, or... that's enough. That's enough to... They don't even have to look hoggish or brutish or beastly. Just walk a little weird and be creeping in the woods.
Right, right.
I'm done.
Well, it kind of gets into... Obviously, they didn't have this concept in the 1800s, but the concept of the uncanny valley, where as something approaches the aspect of man, the closer it becomes, the more unsettled by it we are, until it reaches a point where it is lifelike. So that's why if you look at, cartoon characters or anime characters or, Pokemon or something, they're cute and we like them. But then you look at like a mannequin or something and it's creepy and sort of like, ooh, because it's close enough to human, but it's like, ooh, not quite right. Yeah. So I think that's like what he's experiencing here.
Or like Westworld stuff.
Yes.
They're not quite, but in that series, they're really, really, really close. That you can't tell them apart. But it's like something to do with the eyes just aren't quite.
Right, exactly. So he's experiencing this here, Prendrick is. Because they stand and they walk, but there's something just a little off about them, and he's kind of creeped by it. So we get back, chapter 10, we get back to the enclosure, and Montgomery brings him home, and so they start talking a little bit, and Prendrick is trying to get out of Montgomery. Hey man, I saw something. Mm-hmm. What is this? What is going on? Montgomery's like, hey, you're just nervous, man. I'll give you something. Don't sweat it. It's cool. And he drugs him. Doesn't answer his questions.
He helps him sleep.
Exactly.
I think Prendrick is willingly drugged.
Yes, he does. He gave it to me. I took it unresistingly, and he helped me into the hammock. So, Montgomery tucks him in and says, all right.
I love Montgomery's like, I should have let you drift out to our silly little island.
Exactly.
Silly island.
Silly. Such fun we have
Montgomery
here.
Is terrible.
He's a really bad liar is what he really
ears?
is.
What ears? Silly island.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, for the past 10 years, he's basically had no human contact other than Moreau. And so he's kind of probably lost some...
And this has become his normal. Like, this is...
Right.
I live on this island with all of these people.
Sure.
These beast people.
Yeah.
It's silly to him now.
So he wakes up. Prendrick wakes up. Montgomery gave him some food. And he says, hey, look, I'm busy. I gotta get going. Unfortunately, Montgomery, which I think, again, they have lived on this island for 10 years, he forgets to lock the door behind him when he goes back into the enclosure.
Yep.
So Prendrick, who just can't leave things alone, decides to open the door and go in. He sees what's going on. He sees blood everywhere, and he saw something strapped to a table or a bed, and all of a sudden Moreau jumps into the frame of view, covered in blood, and slams the door and says, get out of here, Prendrick, and, that's that.
Montgomery tries, he's just like, Prendrick, stop! Just stop! Like, shut your eyes, close the door!
Don't look!
Forget what you've seen here.
And he
Moreau's
hears...
concerned.
And of course, there's just a door between these guys. They stand there talking, and Moreau says he's going to ruin the work of a lifetime. And Montgomery says, well, he doesn't understand. And Moreau just goes, can't explain yet. No time.
How can you not explain right now? I mean, they must seriously be jaded about what they're doing right now because you've brought a stranger onto your island. Maybe it's the fact that the stranger can't go anywhere, can't call anyone, can't do anything, and that he's stuck there.
Right.
And they can't fathom that he would run away into just the
Nothing.
jungle of the island. But he's like, I can't explain it to him. What? What?
If H.G. Wells were a modern screenwriter, we would flay him for the lazy trope of, no time to explain. Come on.
Yeah.
When clearly
Exactly.
you need to explain to the protagonist what's going on.
Or they run away in absolute terror, which there are like 3 or 4 movies of this book.
There are.
I think 3.
We should probably watch one once this is over.
I think so. The latest one is in the 96, maybe? With like Marlon Brando as Dr. Moreau and Val Kilmer as Montgomery? Or Pendrick? I
Interesting.
think Montgomery.
Yeah, he kind of fits a more Montgomery-ish vibe, I think.
Yeah. The pictures, though, that I saw, the images of the Beast people look more Broadway cats to me than they did disfigured and horrible.
Which would probably be more unsettling
creatures.
than actual disfigurement. I have to admit, before we read this, I had in my head dinosaurs for some reason. I don't know why.
Because the word paddock?
Well, no, I thought the island of Dr. Moreau was like a dinosaur island. That's what my impression of the book.
Park-esque.
Yeah, my impression of the book before we read it, but I guess pleasantly surprised that it's not.
I think I knew of this book only, I think 2 friends of mine, or at least one friend and one former friend, both had read it. And I should reach out to him and ask him because I think he really enjoyed it. But I knew they were some sort of animal creatures.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, I didn't know that level.
I don't know why you thought dinosaurs.
I don't know either, but maybe there's some other movie about an island. I don't know. Jurassic Park. Yeah. So anyway, this totally freaks Prendick out. We get into chapter 11, and he runs off. So Moreau and Montgomery immediately start chasing him. Now we're getting into the good stuff here.
Yeah.
So they chase him into the woods. They got the dogs with them, and Prendick runs into one of the boat guys. So one of the 3 dudes that Moreau had on the boat to help unload the cargo from the Ipekakuna. Mm-hmm. He runs into him, and he's really excited because Prendick has 5 fingers.
Yeah, they count them. Counted his digits slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Eh?
That's pretty exciting right there.
Yeah.
And of course, Prendick being hungry, he just immediately asks him, hey, can I get something to eat around here? Because that's the first thing you would ask a random beast person in the jungle, right? I'm kind of hungry.
Hey, man. Cool, you got 5 fingers? Me too.
Yeah.
Give me some food with those fingers.
Let's go have something to eat, man. So he says, yeah. He gives him some fruit, and he's like, hey, let's go back to the huts. I'll show you where we eat. Take you back.
Get some man's food.
Yes. So he says, come along. So they go through the trees, and we get to chapter 12, and he comes into the huts. So it's smelly, it's dirty, it's narrow. So I pictured, in this description, like a Russian overnight train, right? Like you're walking down the corridor of the train, and there's all the little alcoves on the sides where people are sleeping, and they're, with the curtains.
I have no reference to imagine a Russian overnight train. I'm sorry. My travels in the world have not been nearly as extensive as yours.
I've not traveled an overnight train in Russia either, but that's what I picture anyway. Like people kind of hanging out into the passageway out of their curtains, and these kind of beast people everywhere. And he hears voices.
They're all jazzed up
him.
that it's a man. It's a man.
Right.
All the whispers.
Exactly.
It's a man. It's a man. He's come to live with us. It's a man.
Pretty exciting stuff.
And he's like, Pendrick's gnawing at a coconut. It's like
Yes, he is. He gave him half a coconut.
eating a coconut.
Eating a coconut. It's fantastic. So he gets there, and if there's a man, then he must learn the law. That's just, I mean, obviously. So they take him to the sayer of the law, and I didn't know what to picture other than like, you know, like a Lhasa Apso dog or something laying in the corner, like it's just covered in gray, long, stringy fur. You know, like that's what I'm picturing or something.
You think that's who the beast people would choose as their sayer?
A sayer of the law.
Lhasa Apso? The vivisected Lhasa Apso?
Well, they picked this gray thing, this gray mass of hair, which I was really surprised as we got to this section. They speak pretty well.
With a somewhat good English accent, some of them.
Right, yeah.
Which is
So
interesting.
Yes, the English accent was strangely good.
Unlike
so they
mine,
start going
if I
through the
was
law. I don't know how much.
Yes.
Do you want to?
What are some of the laws?
Talk about the
Not
law.
to go on all fours. That is the law. Are we not men?
We
Each
are
time it
Devo.
ends with, "Are we not men?"
We are Devo. No, sorry.
Not to suck up drink, not to eat fish or flesh, which I think is odd because men eat fish and flesh, but they're
don't
not.
forget, there's not much meat on the island. That's why we had to bring the rabbits in.
Oh.
So
But
maybe
if they're not to eat fish or flesh, then why
save it for Montgomery and Moreau.
bother?
Maybe they want
I
to eat
guess
it.
so. Yeah. Not to chase other men. Don't claw the barks of trees.
Plus, the other thing I was thinking is not to eat fish or flesh. You got to think if they're carnivorous, then all the animals that Montgomery and Moreau are bringing in and then vivisecting and turning into beast men, would that not just descend them into cannibalism?
Probably.
A little callback to chapter 1, huh? Look at that. Nice job, H.G. Wells.
I also find it interesting that the refrain at the end of each law isn't a statement. For we are men. This is the law, for we are men. It's, are we not men? It's a question, I think, meant to be a hypothetical question, at least in the way the law is written. But for us as readers, are you? Like,
they aren't.
What is
really, right?
Yeah.
Or are they? Have they become now? I guess maybe that's a question.
I think that's the big question. But then they have a long list of prohibitions, and then they start chanting to, his is the house of pain, his is the hand that makes, his is the hand that wounds, his is the hand that heals, his is the lightning flash, his is the deep salt sea, his are the stars in the sky. This is a cool chant.
So jump around. Jump around.
Jump up and get down, but not on all fours. Only on two.
Only on two, exactly. Right, so it's interesting. We haven't hit a distinction yet, but they keep saying he's a five-man like me, says the 8-man. So I'm curious about, even within the beast people here, they have a sort of hierarchy, maybe the ones that are formed from, we're talking about pumas and llamas. We haven't gotten to maybe, has Moreau done apes or chimpanzees or anything like that would have 5 fingers?
Mm-hmm. He clearly must have.
He must have at some point.
And then the sayer, the grisly, hairy creature, says he has little nails. It is well. So it must be, you've got 5 fingers, plus you have these little nails, is an indication that you clearly are a man. As
opposed to having, like, a dog paw claw, or something.
Or like a little, one of them has like a talon, or like like a hoof and a talon put together somehow. And along with all these prohibitions and the chanting, no one escapes, or none escape. It says, evil are the punishments of those who break the law, none escape. Now, we don't know at this point who punishes, if the beast people take it into their own hands, or if Moreau comes and punishes them. I have a feeling it's probably the beast people themselves.
Perhaps.
But I could be wrong.
They've had, perhaps that Moreau's drilled into them so much that you can't slip back to bestiality, that if they detect that, then they just destroy the creature that is an aberration amongst themselves.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, Moreau interacts with them. He doesn't just create and release because he comes to the village. So he knows where the village is.
Yeah, they're making such a loud tumult. They're being so loud with all the chanting that Moreau and Montgomery are able to find them.
Right. And he's not freaked out by this. He's just like, hey, everybody stop him.
Yeah.
So he obviously, is in control. He's in charge. They listen to him. So they go to grab Prendick, but he gets away.
He's like, he crawls away.
Right.
He goes through his forearms, his head among thorns, his ears bleeding, his face is bleeding.
He's in
fell
bad
into
shape.
A ravine. Yeah.
And it's kind of depressing because as this chapter ends, he says, I knew now how much hope of help for me lay in the beast people. So, when he first met them, he's like, oh, maybe these guys will, I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe they'll hide me. Maybe they'll help me. Maybe we can attack Moreau. But now he realizes, oh, no, these are Moreau's guys. Like, I am totally cut off and alone and stuck on this island.
Yeah. Which brings us to our last chapter for this discussion.
Right. A parlay. So he eventually makes his way down to the beach and once again decides, you know what? It is better that I am just going to throw myself into the ocean and kill myself. It's kind of a theme with old Prendick here.
What choice does he... I was thinking about this. What choice does he have? He's on an island with beast people, Moreau and Montgomery, who at this point he thinks are vivisecting humans.
Correct.
And he thinks that they are like going to Hansel and Gretel him. They're like going to take care of him, get him in good health, and then he's going to end up like the puma, which he thinks is a man.
Correct.
At this point. And so he's like, do I choose live dissection? Do I choose to be vivisected? Do I choose to be ripped apart by the beast people? Or do I choose just my own fate and throw myself into the ocean? And he chooses the ocean at this point.
So this is interesting. So he's down on the beach. Moreau and Montgomery show up. They've got guns. And they're like, hey, would you just stop for a minute? And what are you doing? I'm going to kill myself, right? So he gets into a conversation with them. So he knows that they're cutting up the puma. He knows it's a puma because he was on the ship with it. He saw the puma brought in. And yet, he makes the leap that the beast people were men that they've cut up. So, I mean, maybe he thinks that they're prepping puma parts to attach to him. Because, like I said, he knows it's a puma. But
he knows
he says
the puma was in pain. But I think, really, when the puma was all ripped apart, it was pink, right? It didn't look like the puma anymore.
So he thinks like it was another man they had like hidden on the island somewhere that he hadn't met, perhaps.
I don't know. Or
maybe
he thinks the beast people, like you're saying, were men.
Well, he clearly does because he says that to Montgomery,
right,
in this chapter.
And so maybe he thinks it's one of them. Or it's, somebody else that he didn't know was on the island. But I think that's the whole, the big thing that Moreau needs to explain to him eventually at the end of this chapter when he agrees to talk with them. I think it's because not just that he explains that the beast people weren't ever people, or he tries to. Yeah, at the end, he says, but I saw and I said in the enclosure, he says, that was the puma.
Which is strange because he had said that he knew it was the puma because he heard the cries of it. But he does, when he's out in the water and they stop him and he's going to kill himself, they said, why? He said, because it's better than being tortured by you. And Montgomery, I like Montgomery. I told you so, says Montgomery. Montgomery's like, come on, man. He thinks we're crazy. And Moreau says, what makes you think I shall torture you? And Prendick responds, what I saw, and those yonder. And then Moreau's like, don't talk about them. And he says, I will not. He said, they were men. What are they now? At least I will not be like them. And so this is, before we started recording, you were talking about this, where Prendick starts shouting and yelling, and perhaps, I don't know, we'll see if, in our second half, if he's planting a seed here. But he shouts to the beast men, do you not see that these men still fear you? go in dread of you? Why then do you fear them? You are many. And Montgomery's like, for God's sake, stop, Prendrick.
Shut up.
Just shut up. So the two of them, Moreau and Montgomery, just start shouting as loud as they can so these people can't hear Prendrick. But then it says, they seemed to be trying to understand me, to remember, I thought, something of their human past. So he still thinks that they were humans. And this is where we get to Moreau just going, would you just listen to me? And he says to him in Latin, the Hae non sut homines sut animalia qui nos habemus, vivisected. I did not study Latin in high school. I'm very sorry, so everyone can correct me, my pronunciation of Latin. But basically he says, these are not humans. These are animals that have been vivisected.
Which he calls a humanizing process.
Humanizing process.
Come ashore.
I'll explain.
It's a lot to explain. Oh, so you didn't have time before, but now, suddenly.
Now that I've tried to kill myself for attention, now you'll talk to me, right? Great. Good job, Prendrick. Good job. Please, if you're thinking about hurting yourself, don't. Please call the suicide hotline. Do not do that.
Don't jump into water full of sharks, which is where Prendick. No.
Prendick.
Prendick,
yes.
That's where Mr. Shut Up is. That's much easier to say.
Mr. Shut Up. That's probably why Drunk Davies was like, Mr. Shut Up.
Yeah. He said, the water just beyond where you are is deep and full of sharks.
That's my way.
That's my way.
Short and sharp, presently. I don't know that getting killed by a shark would be short and sharp, so I don't quite know if he knows what death by shark is going to feel like.
Oh my God. Depends on what part they bite first, I guess.
I suppose.
Ugh. But they toss him. He knows that they have revolvers. And to gain trust, Montgomery and Moreau toss him both revolvers. And he's like, you've got a third. I still don't trust you. And they're like, just...
Another gun hidden somewhere. But I guess you're right. He says, I remembered something. He says, I saw in the enclosure. And that was the puma. So it's odd. He in the beginning knew it was the cries of the puma, but then when he went into the enclosure, he doesn't think, oh, that's the puma. I guess maybe in whatever Montgomery and Moreau were doing, it had progressed to the point where it looked human enough that he thought it was a man.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I love Moreau in very villainous fashion. Villains can always logic their way as the protagonist is trying to figure out what's going on. They're like, let me just explain. And Moreau says, I want you to think things over. In the first place, I didn't ask you here. We didn't go get you for this purpose. If we vivisected men, wouldn't we import men and not beasts?
Yeah.
And we drugged you last night and you're fine. Had we wanted to work any mischief, as he calls it, wouldn't we have done that while you were drugged? So, and also, Montgomery, him. He's not capable of that, is he?
Come on.
Right? We chased you for a good reason. Let us talk to you. Why should we shoot you when you just offered to drown yourself? That'd be so much easier.
So
We'd just let you be eaten by the sharks.
We'd save our bullets, which we don't have a limitless supply of on this island.
So Moreau suddenly,
He makes a lot of sense, this Moreau. I don't know.
Apparently. He makes enough sense.
He does.
Montgomery, to his credit, says, you're a silly ass for the second time in this chapter. He just insults him. Silly ass, get out of the water. Come on. I'm not going to explain anything to you. Just get out. So he distrusts Moreau, but Montgomery was a man I felt I could understand.
Well, they sort of are kindred spirits in a sense. He did save him, and they have sort of medical background in London, and they're both kind of here. Prendick, totally against his will. Montgomery has alluded to circumstances which led him to being there, which he apparently does not like. So it's not as though he is all in on Moreau's stuff. But I guess it kind of brings up the question, why when he's on these, puma hunting expeditions, why doesn't he just get off the boat and leave? I mean, he doesn't have to go back to Moreau. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Moreau's got something on him that he's got to return to.
It's an interesting question. Why does he keep coming back if he doesn't like it? They've been there, I think it's 11 years on the island together. And they spent some time together in London beforehand, I think, as well. Which we'll get that. I'm sure we're going to get the backstory.
Well, you've read ahead already, so...
Just one chapter. Just one. But at the end of this chapter, Prendick has both revolvers. Montgomery and Moreau are walking a little bit ahead of him. He wants them to walk with their hands up. Moreau refuses because of the aesthetics. It'll make him look weak in front of the Beast People. So he's like, fine, just walk. And the Beast People are still watching, and the Montgomery and Moreau have whips, and they crack them at the Beast People, which keeps them back, like circus lions, I suppose.
Yes.
And he says a very ominous sentence at the end of the chapter that they may once have been animals, but I never before saw an animal trying to think. Dun, dun, dun.
Yes.
What has he done with his implanting?
Good spot to cut it off this week, too.
Yeah.
Leave it on a cliffhanger.
I feel like if you've never seen an animal try to think, you just haven't looked at animals in your life, ever.
Well, I think they do think, but they don't. I think, I'm not a philosophy major or anything, but the distinction that I've heard posited is the difference between a human and an animal. It's not our ability to think, but humans think about thinking.
We're metacognitive.
Yes. So, yes, an animal obviously thinks and puzzles things out, but they don't sit there and philosophize about the nature of their own thoughts.
But we don't actually know that. There's no way to know that if Clank sits around thinking about thinking.
Does he look like he's thinking about thinking? Anyway. So this was I quite enjoyed this. This was really a page turner for me. More so than, I enjoyed Call of the Wild. I enjoyed the Metamorphosis, but this one hooked me. I was totally into this one and couldn't wait to read more. And I'm looking forward to next week getting into more of it.
I find myself fully... it could be because I haven't read it before, and I have read the other ones, although rereads are great for me too. But I find myself fully absorbed in what's going on. Like, I enter the island and I'm with Pendrick and I'm seeing it's very vivid in my mind. And I have that feeling you get when you want, like you said, it's a page turner, but I want to get back to reading it. And since the chapters are so short, I can do that a few times a day, which is awesome. And you can
reread the chapters quickly too.
Yeah. I just get fully sucked in. And my son is like, Mama, look at me. What are you doing? I'm like, I'm reading. He's like, that's not a book, because I've got it on the iPad instead of a book.
I find it quite suspenseful as well, even though with the conceit of the papers and the revelation in the introduction, we know Prendick gets picked up from the island at some point. So he escapes the island. But even so, I am still sort of invested in his safety. And, I feel, when he's set adrift, I was still anxious and nervous for him and putting myself in that situation. Even though logically we know he escapes and writes these papers at some point.
Maybe he puts them in a bottle and throws them into the ocean.
Well, no, in the introduction it says he gets picked up. So so we know he gets picked up,
I clearly read that introduction very closely.
Apparently so. It says that what we know is that he passed out of human knowledge and reappeared in the same part of the ocean after a space of 11 months. In some way, he must have lived during the interval. So there you go. So it's 11 months till he gets rescued. And we've only been on the island 3 or 4 days at this point.
Is that how long it's... I thought it was only 1 day.
I guess...
The night he was drugged. He woke up, entered the room,
the second day,
and ran away. Yeah.
Yeah, that could have been. Yeah, I don't think he passed. You're right. I don't think he passed it. Well, there was the first night that he ran off. No, I guess that's when Montgomery brought him back and drugged him. Yeah. Yeah. So he's only been on the island, maybe 24 hours? Mm-hmm. Maybe a little more. And so eventually he gets picked up 11 months later. You add in a little bit of time, however long he was on from the time, the week or so, 10 days, 12 days that he was from the Lady Vane wreck until he was picked up and brought to the island. So it's been 2 weeks since the wreck of the Lady Vane, basically.
Can you just imagine being, first of all, shipwrecked, then picked up thinking you're okay, only to be almost forcibly shipwrecked or abandoned on the sea again, to come to this island of horrors? You must think, at some point, I would be thinking, maybe I'm still on that freaking dinghy. Maybe I drank more salt water.
Nightmare.
Maybe I drank salt water. Maybe I am a cannibal and I something is happening to me physically because I ate human meat or something. But imagining like you are that character, this has got to be the most... No wonder he ran away. I would want to kill myself too. I would want to just run aimless. Yes, that's the word. Absolutely
it's
disorienting.
Terrifying. Yeah. I mean, I'm terrified for him. Like, I physically felt reading some of these sections. And of course, maybe my fear of drowning in the ocean as well. But, twice in a very short span. And then he, towards the end of this section, just decides, I'm going to drown myself and be done with this. Yeah, the utter hopelessness of his situation. Like, he can't see a way out of it right now. Terrifying. But
I can't. I'm excited to read I'm excited to read the rest. There we go.
I am as well. So for next week, we are going to finish the book. So that'll take us to the end. And I'm excited to see what's going on with this and see where this takes us.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So we hope you all are enjoying The Island of Dr. Moreau. So tomorrow you will have the rest of the book in your feed. So listen along with us or read along with us, and we'll talk about it next week.
And you can find us on Instagram at CYSTpod, Facebook at CYSTpod. Right?
On Twitter at CYSTpod.
Yeah.
And via email, cystpod@gmail.com.
Just take that formula, put it into your favorite social media, and you will find us.
Exactly. And please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your podcast listening medium of choice. We appreciate y'all listening. Send us your thoughts. Let us know how you're enjoying The Island of Dr. Moreau. Let us know what books you're looking forward to in the future. This has been Classics You Slept Through, and Mr. Thomas is running the study hall, so that means you can do whatever you want.